Under the radiant shimmer of Velharitha's twin suns, the lecture hall pulsed with quiet awe. Translucent walls glowed a soft amber, filtering sunlight through layers of organic crystal. The air itself hummed faintly, alive with bioluminescent motes drifting like golden dust. Rows of alien students filled the amphitheater, their scaled skin refracting light in muted tones of blue and violet. At the center podium stood Professor Xylan Morth, a towering Velharith male whose presence radiated confidence born from centuries of academic prestige. He moved with reptilian precision, every motion deliberate. His long fingers traced across the holodisplay, summoning swirling diagrams of ecosystems and planetary models. Observe, his voice rumbled, resonant as a low drumbeat, the gradient of survivability across known biospheres. From the tranquil air gardens of Eshkai to the molten valleys of our own Velharith. His amber eyes glimmered as he turned to the audience. And what do we call a world such as ours? The chorus came as one, a death world, Professor. Xylan smiled, exposing fine rows of ivory fangs. Correct. A world so vicious, so ceaselessly predatory, that life itself must evolve to be cruel in order to endure. He paused, letting the gravity of the statement settle. We Velhairthans are not merely survivors, we are the galaxy's apex creation. Born of chaos. Tempered in venom. Perfected by danger. A murmur of pride spread through the students. The younger ones puffed their throats, the older nodded in agreement. Deathworld. It was more than a classification, it was their heritage, the mythos that defined their superiority. At the far edge of the hall, in the very back row where shadows softened the biolight, sat a lone human. His name was Elias Ward. Dressed in the muted grey uniform of the Galactic Exchange, he seemed deliberately small amidst the brilliance of alien scales and chitinous armor. His skin, pale and unarmored, caught faint reflections from the walls. No fangs, no claws, no obvious weaponry, just a notebook and a gaze too steady for comfort. He had not spoken once since the semester began. Most had forgotten he was there. Now, Xylan continued, pacing with calculated gravitas, many of you have heard lesser species speak of struggle, storms, predators, disease. Yet, when examined by proper scientific measure, their worlds rank low on the death index. 2.5, perhaps 3, in rare cases 4. Comfortable. Manageable. Merciful. He turned, talons tapping against the podium. Velharith, by contrast, measures at 7.2. Atmospheric toxicity, megafaunal aggression, predatory saturation, tectonic volatility, each parameter near the limit of tolerability. Our biology reflects it. Redundant organs. Lead dermal armor. Regenerative capability. Even our venom glands exist not by choice, but necessity. Laughter and clicking applause rippled through the class. Pride was a reflex here. Professor, a younger student ventured, his throat sac trembling with nervous light, is it true that no other intelligent species has ever originated from a true death world? True, Xylan said without hesitation. We have searched, catalogued, and analyzed tens of thousands of biospheres. None share our evolutionary violence. None have produced a sentient race capable of mastering their own chaos. The student exhaled in awe. Others exchanged smug glances. Xylan continued, voice deepening. Understand this truth well. Civilization is born from endurance. Weak worlds yield weak minds. The gentle breeds the complacent. Only those who stare into extinction and refuse it can achieve greatness. He paused to let the weight of his words linger, then smiled. If another death world species existed, my young scholars, the galaxy would already kneel before them. That was when a quiet voice came from the back. Maybe it already has. Heads turned. The light shimmered across dozens of slit-pupiled eyes, narrowing toward the lone human who had spoken for the first time. Elias Ward closed his notebook and met the professor's gaze. His tone had been mild, but his posture carried something unmistakable, an ease that didn't belong in a room full of predators. Xylan regarded him with faint amusement. You are the exchange student from Sol, yes? Earth, I believe it's called? Yes, Professor. Elias's voice was steady, unhurried. That's right. The alien lecturer's crest twitched in mild curiosity. I've read your world's file. Oxygen heavy, moderate biosphere, minimal environmental hostility. Death index, 4.2. Hardy, perhaps, but nowhere near the level of a true death world. Elias gave a small shrug. Depends who wrote the file. A ripple of laughter coursed through the hall, sharp and derisive. Xylan allowed it for a moment before raising a clawed hand. And what would you propose, Mr. Ward? That your Earth rivals Velharith in danger? Elias leaned back, the faintest smile at the corner of his mouth. Not rivals. Surpasses. The laughter this time was louder, echoing through the hall's curved architecture. Some students hissed in amusement, others simply looked pitying. Xylan chuckled, indulgent. You misunderstand the scale, human. Our homeworld devours the unprepared. Even our own kind must fight to maturity. The weak perish before hatching. Do you truly believe your peaceful blue planet belongs in such company? Elias's eyes hardened, not with anger, but something older, deeper. Peaceful, he said softly. That's not the word I'd use. Silence crept back into the room. The faint hum of the holoscreens was suddenly too loud. He rose from his seat, his movement unremarkable yet commanding. We come from a place where the air itself can kill you if you're careless. Where oceans drown continents, mountains explode, and the ground shakes for no reason at all. Where predators learn to hunt in packs before we learn to make fire. Where disease evolves faster than we can cure it. A murmur spread through the audience, uneasy this time. Elias's tone carried no pride, only fact. We built shelters because storms would tear the flesh from your bones. We tamed fire because nights were cold enough to freeze blood. We learned to fight, not because we liked it, but because everything else already did. He paused, eyes sweeping over their gleaming scales, their fanged mouths. You call yourselves the only Deathworlders. But tell me, how many of your cities burned themselves to ash before you learned to stop? The hall fell utterly silent. Even Xylan's throat lights dimmed. Elias let the moment hang, then sat back down. Where I come from, he said quietly, we call that Tuesday. For the first time in decades, Professor Xylan found no words. His claw trembled faintly against the podium, the smooth chitin clicking once before stilling. The data graphs still hovered beside him, their luminous lines measuring environmental severity and biological durability. Yet, as he glanced between the projections and the humans seated so calmly in the last row, a disquiet formed, a subtle crack in the foundation of certainty. Something about Elias's tone. The calm way he spoke of extinction. It was not bravado. It was memory. Xylan adjusted his crest, masking the sudden unease. Interesting claim, he said at last, voice measured. Perhaps, one day, we will verify this. Elias only nodded, expression unreadable. You might not like the results. The class exhaled as if released from invisible pressure. Laughter bubbled nervously, and the professor signaled the session's end. The holodisplays dissolved into faint vapor. As the hall emptied, Xylan lingered at his podium, staring after the retreating figure of the human. He tapped his wrist console, pulling up Earth's planetary file once more. 4.2, the database repeated, sterile and certain. Yet his gaze drifted to the human's biometric readings, heart rate, temperature, neuroresponse, all recorded automatically during class. The numbers didn't make sense. Stress levels negligible. Body temperature elevated but stable. No adrenaline spike, despite confrontation. He frowned. Impossible. Outside, Elias Ward stepped into the corridor, the air alive with the whisper of alien gossip. His expression remained distant, thoughtful. He could still feel the weight of their laughter, the arrogance behind it, but none of it mattered. The professor's final look had told him enough. He smiled faintly to himself as the door sealed behind him. The galaxy didn't know yet. But it would. The laboratory smelled faintly of ozone and antiseptic, a sterile chamber of glass and light, suspended above the Academy's canyon. Transparent floors revealed the glowing rivers below, their molten currents pulsing like veins through Velharitha's crust. Professor Xylan stood before a hovering array of scanners, his crest flattened in concentration. Across the room, Elias Ward sat on a reinforced bench, sleeves rolled up, watching the alien instruments hum to life around him. "Remain still," Xylan instructed, voice tight. "Your biochemistry confounds the senses." Elias gave a faint, amused nod. "That's not the first time I've heard that." He looked oddly comfortable, despite being surrounded by machines designed to analyze predators. The translucent coils of the scanner wound around his arms, taking blood samples, tissue readings, and neurofeedbacks. Xylan's eyes darted across the holodisplay, narrowing with every line of data that appeared. "Your cardiovascular activity is unstable," Xylan muttered. "You should be experiencing fatigue, possibly shock." Yet, he adjusted the display, the alien equivalent of a frown tightening his scaled features. "You are not." "Guess I'm not very good at biology," Elias said, smirking faintly. "This is not humor, Mr. Ward." The professor's tone hardened, yet something like fascination crept beneath it. "Your cellular repair rate is anomalous. Your immune system, erratic, but efficient. You maintain a constant state of biochemical readiness, as though perpetually prepared for injury." "That's accurate," Elias replied quietly. "We evolved that way." Xylan looked up, eyes narrowing. "To live constantly on the verge of harm." Elias nodded. "On Earth, it's the only way to stay alive." The professor leaned closer, claws clasped behind his back. His scales caught the sterile light, gleaming faintly gold. "I've seen apex predators that rest for days between hunts. Your kind appears built to never rest at all. That is not adaptation, that is pathology." Elias met his gaze steadily. "We call it survival instinct." For a moment, neither spoke. The soft hum of the scanners filled the silence. Through the glass walls, a storm brewed on the horizon, amber lightning flickering across the twin suns. The sound was faint, yet Elias found it familiar in a way that made the corners of his mouth tighten. "You doubt my world's classification," Elias said at last. "So test it." Xylan's crest flickered in surprise. "Test it?" "You have your Deathworld trials. Your simulations. You claim to measure adaptation by endurance, yes." Elias stood, rolling his sleeves back down, the motion precise and calm. "Let's see how I do." The professor stared at him, assessing. "You do not grasp what you are asking. The trials simulate the Velharith homeworld environment, atmospheric toxins, radiation bursts, carnivorous fauna. It is designed to kill. Instantly. That's the point." The alien exhaled slowly, the membranes of his nostrils flaring. "Foolishness," he muttered. "Unnecessary bravado. Or proof." Elias's voice remained quiet, but his eyes, gray and steady, held something that made Xylan's heart rate rise despite himself. He turned away, adjusting the scanner again, trying to mask the strange unease in his chest. The readings continued to baffle him, heart rate irregular, cortisol levels high, yet neurological focus unwavering. He'd seen Velharith soldiers crumble under lesser strain. Behind him, Elias's voice broke the silence again. "You said your species survived venom and flame. You evolved armor and redundancy. We didn't. We're soft. Fragile. But we learned to turn our fragility into something else." Xylan glanced over his shoulder. "And what is that?" "Adaptability." Before the professor could respond, the lab's door hissed open. A younger researcher stepped in, a thin, violet-scaled male with nervous energy. "Professor, the predator containment chamber is prepared for the physiology test," he announced. "Shall I bring in the specimen?" Xylan hesitated. His instincts told him this was unwise. Yet curiosity, scientific and personal, won over caution. "Proceed," he ordered. The assistant nodded and left. Moments later, heavy footsteps reverberated through the corridor beyond. The lab's walls trembled as containment fields powered up. A guttural growl rolled through the air, primal and deep enough to vibrate the glass. From behind reinforced barriers emerged the test subject, a Velharith predator, sleek and dark, its skin patterned like living obsidian. Twin mandibles clicked as it thrashed against its bindings. Its venom glands pulsed faintly at the throat. Elias's expression didn't change. This creature's venom liquefies muscle tissue, Xylan explained. One scratch, and death follows within minutes. The human nodded. We'll see. The professor's crest flattened again. You will not survive contact. I am ending this absurdity before. But before he could finish, Elias stepped forward, unfastening his exchange badge, laying it neatly on the console. Then watch. The safety field shimmered, dissolving at Xylan's remote command. The predator lunged, a blur of teeth and claws. Gasps erupted from the observing assistants behind the transparent barrier. Elias moved, not fast by alien standards, but precise. He sidestepped, took the creature's strike on his left forearm, and drove his knee into its chest with brutal efficiency. Bone cracked. The predator recoiled, screaming. Elias seized its throat and slammed it against the wall, the impact rattling the lab's supports. The simulation sphere loomed in silence, a vast dome of mirrored alloy and suspended holograms, humming faintly with contained power. It was the pride of Velharitha's academy, a chamber where entire worlds could be conjured in light and data. Normally, no outsider was permitted inside it. But the human had challenged that rule, and Xylan Moth had agreed, against his own better judgment. He stood now at the observation platform, flanked by faculty and students, every gaze fixed on the man below. Elias Ward stood alone in the center of the activation circle, stripped of armor, of equipment, even of the bandage that had covered his healing wound. Only a neutral bodysuit clung to him, the gray fabric already streaked with dried blood. You understand the conditions? Xylan's voice echoed from the comm system, low but resonant. No weapons, no assistance, no interference once the simulation begins. Elias tilted his head slightly. That's what a test means, isn't it? A murmur ran through the observation deck. Some called it madness. Others whispered admiration. Xylan silenced them with a gesture. The scientist in him demanded proof, but the sentient part of him, the creature who knew fear, wanted the human to fail. The simulation field flickered to life. The dome darkened. Light warped. In an instant, the clean metal chamber transformed into a wilderness of nightmare. Crimson skies pressed low over shattered mountains. The air shimmered with toxic haze. Geysers hissed molten steam into the air while rivers of acid cut through black stone. The gravity spiked by half. Wind screamed with metallic grit. The environment was an exact replica of Velharith during its most hostile epoch, where even the evolved ancestors of Xylan's kind had struggled to crawl out of extinction. The air shimmered around Elias as the gravity pressed him down. He staggered once, drew a breath, then steadied. His heartbeat echoed faintly through the sensor feeds. Begin, Xylan ordered. The environment responded instantly. A massive winged predator tore through the red mist, scales glittering like molten glass. It dived, shrieking, talons extended. Elias ducked, rolled through the sludge, and came up with a broken shard of rock in hand. The creature swung again, and he sidestepped, jamming the rock into the joint of its wing as it passed. Blood, not red but luminous orange, splattered across the cracked ground. He didn't chase. He watched. Waited. Breathing measured, eyes tracking every ripple of the air. The alien observers gasped as data streamed across the holograms, heart rate spiking, but not dangerously. Oxygen levels dropping under the toxic mix, yet stabilizing within moments. The man was adjusting. He shouldn't be able to metabolize that atmosphere, one assistant muttered. Xylan didn't answer. His hands were clenched behind his back, claws cutting faint grooves into the rail. On the ground, Elias moved again. The wind carried grit sharp enough to flay exposed skin, yet he pushed through it, finding shelter in the wreck of a stone ridge. He crouched, watching the shadows ripple across the clouds, more predators circling. The world itself seemed to hunt him. He tore a strip from his suit and wrapped it around his mouth. When he moved again, it was with calculated precision. He broke a jagged limb from the ridge, used the weight of the gravity to his advantage, and waited until one of the smaller predators landed near him. The fight was brutal and fast. Claws sliced the air, stone cracked underfoot, and then silence. Elias stood over the simulation creature's corpse, chest heaving. He pried a curved tooth from its maw, fashioned a crude blade, and moved onward. 3 minutes, one of the researchers whispered. His lasted 3 minutes already. That's impossible, said another. Even trained soldiers can't. His not just surviving, Xylan interrupted. His learning. Below, the terrain shifted again. The simulation adapted to his movements, evolving threats as it was designed to. The sky darkened. Lightning tore through the air, thunder rolling like artillery. Acid rain began to fall, burning holes into the stone. Elias raised an arm to shield his face and kept moving uphill toward the flicker of a ridge. The sensors showed his pain levels spiking, his skin temperature rising. Still, he didn't stop. He stumbled once, caught himself, and pressed his hand against the wet rock. The skin there blistered instantly, yet he didn't flinch. His breathing remained slow, deliberate, the rhythm of someone who'd learned to control panic through repetition. Xylan found his throat dry. He'd designed the simulation to test neural endurance, environmental adaptability, physical tenacity, and this human was matching all three. Not through technology, not through evolution, but through sheer stubborn will. At 5 minutes, the dome shuddered as a seismic wave tore through the terrain. The ground split open. A river of molten glass erupted upward, scattering shards in every direction. Elias dove, rolled, and landed hard, the heat scoring his suit. His arm bled freely again, but his expression didn't change. In the observation deck, the faculty had gone completely silent. Even the young students who had once laughed at him now leaned forward, transfixed. End the simulation, one assistant whispered. His proved enough. Not yet, Xylan said, though his voice lacked conviction. Below, Elias rose to his feet. His outline was wreathed in smoke. The sensors struggled to keep up with the environmental distortion. The air shimmered with radiation spikes, pressure waves, chemical toxins, and still, the human stood. The largest predator of the sequence appeared then, a 6-legged reptilian behemoth with armor like volcanic glass. Its roar shook the dome. It charged. Elias didn't run. He waited until the last second, then moved sideways, grabbing one of the loose shards he'd taken earlier. The creature swung, its claws tearing gouges in the ground. Elias drove the shard into its eye, twisting with all his strength. The beast screamed and collapsed, thrashing. Elias fell with it, caught himself, and brought the jagged toothblade down again and again until the simulation registered a kill. The world froze. The colors drained away. The simulation field flickered, then dissolved. Elias stood alone again in the metallic quiet of the chamber, chest rising and falling. The sensors marked the time, 7 minutes, 32 seconds. A record that no Velharith had ever approached unarmored. When the dome lights returned, the audience was utterly still. Xylan descended from the observation platform, moving slowly, like someone walking through a dream. He stopped before the human, who was now kneeling, arms limp, blood trickling from a dozen cuts. Yet his eyes were clear. Xylan looked down at him. His voice, when it came, was almost reverent. How? Elias gave a thin, tired smile. We learned early that comfort kills. On Earth, you get used to fighting for every breath. The professor's gaze shifted to the monitors still displaying the data. Oxygen deprivation, acid burns, cellular breakdown, all visible, all counted by recovery curves that should have been biologically impossible. This simulation replicates my world, Xylan murmured. And yet you survived. Elias interrupted softly. That's what we do. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the alien scholar of Deathworld biology and the man from the world that should not have birthed intelligence at all. Xylan lowered his head, not in submission, but acknowledgement. Your world's classification must be wrong. No species could emerge from a world more lethal than ours. Elias stood slowly, wincing as his joints cracked. He met the professor's gaze with quiet finality. Earth's death index is 9.8. The words hung in the air, heavy as gravity itself. Gasps rippled through the observers. 9.8. Xylan felt the ground sway beneath him, though the dome stood perfectly still. 4 years, his people had believed themselves the galaxy's only survivors of true apocalypse. But this man had lived it since birth. Elias brushed soot from his hands and looked up toward the observation deck, where every student stood frozen in disbelief. "You wanted to see a Deathworlder," he said softly. "Now you have." He turned toward the exit, the door opening with a hiss of cold air. Xylan remained where he was, staring after him. Something deep within him, the certainty of Velharitha's supremacy, fractured. When the door sealed again, the silence in the simulation sphere was absolute. Xylan finally looked back to the cracked floor, to the faint traces of human blood still smoking against alloy. It smelled faintly of iron. Of something alive. Of some thing that refused to die. The rain fell in heavy, rhythmic sheets against the domed skylights of the Velharith Council Hall, its sound muffled by the vastness of the chamber. Xylan stood at the center, motionless, while the elders argued around him in tones too sharp to be scholarly. The holoscreens behind them still played fragments of Elias Ward's simulation, images that none could look away from. "He defied every biological law," said Councillor Merith, her mandibles flexing in disbelief. "No sentient organism can metabolize that atmosphere and live. You tampered with the readings." Xylan's tail flicked once in irritation, though his tone stayed calm. "I verified the data twice. The sensors do not lie. The human endured what would disintegrate even our war forms. You saw it." "He cheated," another voice hissed. "It must have been some concealed device, some adaptation we failed to detect." "He was naked before the storm." Xylan snapped. The echo of his outburst filled the chamber, and for a moment even the rain seemed to hush. "He fought with stone and bone. What machine could have aided that?" The silence that followed was more unsettling than the argument. Elder Sakar, oldest among them, finally spoke, his voice low and brittle. "If the human speaks truth, and his world's death index is 9.8, then every assumption we have made about galactic hierarchy collapses." No one answered him. No one dared. The council adjourned without resolution, leaving Xylan alone with the echo of his own thoughts. He found himself drawn back to the surveillance footage, looping the moment Elias drove the shard into the creature's eye. Not the violence of it, but the calm precision, the absence of rage. A man who killed only because survival demanded it. There was something terrifyingly human in that restraint. When Xylan returned to the research wing, Elias was still there. He sat in the medbay, the bionanites knitting his torn flesh under pale blue light. He looked less like a warrior now, more like an exhausted man trying not to think too much. His gaze tracked the shifting light through the glass, as if it reminded him of something he'd lost long ago. "You didn't come for congratulations," Elias said without turning. "No," Xylan admitted. "I came for understanding." The human gave a dry laugh. "Good luck. We barely understand ourselves." Xylan studied him for a long moment before asking, "Why accept the challenge? You could have refused. You had nothing to prove to us." Elias's expression shifted, a brief flicker of old memory darkening his eyes. "You ever watch your people die from something you can't fight? Disease, famine, the cold that won't end." He flexed his hand, wincing as the nanites sealed a burn. "On Earth, you learn early that surrender gets you killed. Sometimes standing alone is the only way to live." Xylan's quills lowered slightly. "You make survival sound like a religion." "It is," Elias said quietly. "But ours has no gods, just endurance." There was a pause. Machines hummed softly in the background. "Your council will study me," Elias continued, "then decide whether I'm a threat or an opportunity. You'll want to classify Earth, measure it, maybe exploit it." He looked up now, eyes meeting Xylan's with unsettling clarity. "But you've already made a mistake." Xylan tilted his head. "What mistake?" "You're still thinking of us as a species to be evaluated." Elias stood, slow and deliberate, every motion controlled. "We've already done the same to you." Before Xylan could answer, the medbay lights flickered red. Alarms began to pulse through the corridors, 3 sharp tones repeating, the universal signal for containment breach. The alien scientist's eyes widened. "That's impossible. The sphere is sealed." A tremor cut him off. The floor shuddered violently. Through the glass wall beyond the medbay, they saw a distortion ripple across the simulation chamber. The dome pulsed once with violet light, then fractured, shards of holographic reality collapsing in spirals of energy. Security override. Xylan shouted into the comm, shut down the sphere core. No response. The AI system screamed static. Elias grabbed his suit jacket from the bench and slipped into it. What's happening? The simulation matrix is destabilizing, Xylan said, moving quickly to the console. Someone, triggered an internal feedback. It's rewriting the environment algorithms into physical projection. In English. It's bringing the simulation to life. Even as he said it, the hallway lights dimmed, replaced by a sickly red glow. A deep, echoing growl reverberated through the walls. The scent of ozone filled the air. Elias's jaw tightened. Tell me you have weapons. Xylan glanced up sharply, antennae twitching. You intend to fight it? I don't intend to die sitting down. They ran. The corridors of the research facility trembled as the holographic creatures from the simulation began to tear through the reinforced alloy. They were half real, their bodies flickering between data and flesh, their eyes burning with artificial rage. The first one breached near the power conduits, a winged predator, the same species Elias had killed minutes before. Only now, it was 10 times larger.